Hello and welcome. India has slammed the IMF bailout for Pakistan. India has also issued stringent warnings, really, of terror funding risks, given the fact that this fresh bailout has happened. Of course, in a finance ministry release, the International Monetary Policy Fund, the IMF, has reviewed the extended fund facility. India has said, and this lending program of $1 billion has been cleared for Pakistan. Now, of course, this is part of the larger $7 billion lending program. But remember, IMF is also considering a fresh resilience and sustainability facility lending program worth $1.3 billion for Pakistan. Why then has this happened? How could have IMF has kept this on hold? Remember, India had expressed a very strong dissent. India has also said that, look, there's a huge possibility of misuse of debt financing funds for state-sponsored cross-border terrorism. Now, of course, to decode this, I'm joined by Mitali Nikore, Senior Economist. Mitali, thank you for your time. What does this really suggest, and how can India act going forward?
So, Sakshi, let's understand the situation. Let's break it down a little bit first. So, what exactly is happening? So, if we look at the history of the IMF and India and Pakistan's association with the IMF, right? So, today, India is one of the top 20 donor countries to the IMF, which means that India contributes funds to the IMF's, capitalization. Basically, the money which is used to give loans to other countries and bailouts to other countries, India is one of the contributors to that. And India has almost a 2% voting share because, out of all the countries, the vote share is proportionate to how much you contribute to the capital of the IMF. The highest voting share is with the US, which is 16%. And then other countries follow like China, Japan, etc., around 6 to 7%. And then the European countries are there at 4 to 5%, right? So these are the major decision makers, like the US, the biggest decision maker, and then Japan and China, and then other countries follow. Now, Pakistan, on the other hand, in the history of the IMF, has been one of the biggest borrowers since the last 50 years. Pakistan has received 25 bailout packages in the last 50 years from the IMF. And today, as of 31st March 2025, if you look at the annual reports of the IMF, nearly 7% of IMF's total lending across the world is to Pakistan. So Pakistan is one of the is the fifth or sixth biggest debtor to the IMF, and it's in its entire history it has been one of the biggest debtors to the IMF. So that is like just putting that in context is important for us, right? Now, what is happening now? In September 2024, when Pakistan's economy was in massive doldrums and it was very very unstable, and there was even a political crisis going on, the current government of Pakistan went to the IMF and said, please bail us out. That time, the IMF agreed and gave a $7 billion package over a long period, almost 40 months. So you can say 2 to 3 years, right? Now, every few months, there is a review of that 7 billion which has been promised, and the tranches and the money is only released when Pakistan provides a report to the IMF board saying we are meeting the conditions of borrowing. I mean, like in any situation, right? The lender always looks at what is the borrower doing with the money. Now, this report has been accepted by the IMF currently, which was what the board meeting was about yesterday, and the $1 billion has been sanctioned, despite the fact that India, as one of the major, powers and the major executive director, being a major executive director in the IMF, registered a very strong protest that these funds, which the IMF is giving, are being used to finance cross border terror activities, because if Pakistan is financing cross border terror activities, which India has provided evidence for, then even if the IMF money is not directly used for that, it frees up money, right? When you give me $1 billion, it frees up my finances to finance terror. Other money can be used to finance terror, even if IMF money is not directly used. So, if a country is found to be the sponsor of cross border terror, it should not be receiving bailouts from international organizations. is what
Absolutely. I
India
mean,
standing.
this, of course, and this being cleared at a time when, of course, we are in the midst of payback for Pahalgam. We have seen, a fresh terrorism act by, there, and we have also seen the fact that, look, Operation Sindoor has taken effect. So, this, in the midst of all of this, has raised an alarm. And, of course, everyone is really asking that what can India do next, really, to curb these funds for Pakistan, because clearly they're not being used towards development, then, Mitali.
Absolutely, Sakshi. I mean, I think it is in the end the decision of the largest shareholders, right? And the US with 16% votes on the IMF board is really the one who can, trump everybody else in that sense. And this is something which is very concerning, that despite this evidence provided by India, despite the strong protest from India, the IMF board still went ahead with this bailout and is also considering a fresh 1.3 billion dollar resilience funding for Pakistan. It is understandable, of course, based on the IMF rules, that they don't want a country to be unstable, as big an economy as Pakistan to be unstable, and therefore, from a macroeconomic and debt management perspective, it is understandable. But at the same time, now it is incumbent upon India and the Indian diplomatic channels to ensure that Pakistan is relisted in the Financial Action Task Force, in the FATF, because the FATF maintains a list of countries which finance terrorism. And therefore, there needs to be more support gathered from the international community by India to say that we need to first of all investigate the terror financing, that is networks that are operating in Pakistan, and then bring Pakistan on the FATF list, because once Pakistan is on the FATF list, none of the international organizations can touch financing for Pakistan, and will actually be forced to hold financing to Pakistan. So therefore, it becomes very important for India to now isolate Pakistan in international financing networks by proving the presence of the terror financing infrastructure. And that is something that we will have to make the case in the international community now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And of course, we will continue to track this and a lot more going forward.
Thank you.